Well, hello and welcome to my cellar. Should I grow incoherent somewhere along the way, know that I just got done running a game at GaryCon and came straight over here to do this. So if I babble at some point, I hope I catch myself. What are your favorite humanoid baddies to use? I seem to always default to kobolds and goblins because they usually have tricks up their sleeves. Plenty of traps. And in the case of kobolds, might even have a young dragon they're serving. And there's a reply to that. My vote is for bugbears. 3+1 hit dice, surprise opponents on a 1 and 3, not affected by light or darkness. 2d4 damage with a morning star, which is neutral, or 1 or 2 plus hit versus the armor type aircraft, and 6 to 36 appearing with sub chiefs and chiefs, etc., etc. Yes, bugbear. I love using bugbears. I use bugbears a lot in the Wheel of Blame, and not just standard ones. I use miniature ones. I use normal ones. I use giant ones. But kobolds and goblins, I also like because of their trickiness. Orcs are just, less led well. They're just dumb brutes in my world. So yeah, I like bugbears a lot, primarily because they are well organized from the get-go. I was with a group of friends taking a D&D quiz. I got some of the questions correct, specifically because of your videos. Thank you. Quick question: do you always run games, or do you ever get a chance to play? I do get a chance to play every once in a while. In years past, I have often played in one of the celebrity games in Texas each year at the North Texas RPG Convention. I have sat in to other celebrity games. I don't generally seek out run-of-the-mill ordinary games to play, mainly because my mere presence dampens play by some people. They don't want to make a bad idea or a silly suggestion with me sitting at the table, or they defer to me. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So that makes it kind of hard. But occasionally, like I said, occasionally I do get to play in one, and I enjoy it occasionally. Especially a couple of Doug's games over the years. I'm willing to make a fool of myself if the charitable cause is there. What weapon is your favorite to be used as a magic weapon? Do you like magic spears over magic swords, for example? My favorite would be the axe, followed quickly by a hammer. I just like the idea of big bashing weapons. A lot of strength, very little finesse needed, and effective against all kinds of armor. Hit you, a good enough axe hit you in the shoulder wearing chain. Don't have to break the chain, and I can break your shoulder. Same thing with a hammer. My ideal perfect probably weapon would be a +3 to hit, +3 damage axe that comes back after you throw it. I don't mean a Francisco throwing axe. I mean a full-size axe. Whew. Like 2d8, 2d8 +4 damage when you throw it like that, because it would just be a devastating blow if you could throw a full-size axe like that. But hey, that's just me, and it'd just be fun. Here's an answer to this one. Try a Vorpal Khopesh. Okay, now this is a salutary tale on bad decisions. My players found one in a treasure hoard and passed it on immediately. They gave it to a halfling thief henchman as a consolation prize after dividing the lion's share of treasure and other magics amongst themselves. The snobs guffawed. What the hell are we going to do with a Khopesh? Now, Okay, you got to go look this up. I believe it's Khopesh. Or if you watch Forged in Fire, which I do, you know what a Khopesh is. It's a big, wicked, nasty weapon. In terms of, its sole purpose being hurting, it does that very well. Okay, in the next session we played, combat arose and their look of disbelief was priceless. As the decapitations began to tally up from the halfling's new Khopesh, my players were sick at the discovery of what this humble Khopesh's Dwemer hid. They learned quickly the error of taking anything magical for granted. I assured them, tongue-in-cheek, that they had done an exceptionally noble act by giving the most powerful weapon to a worthy underling for his fealty and services. This campaign highlight gives credence to any magic item found moving forward, and of course, much personal satisfaction for a trick well played. You can't blame me. You didn't want the Khopesh. That's right. They didn't want it, didn't do a thorough testing. Thought they'd pawn it off on the Hobbit, who now became a miniature dynamo. Whatever happened to potions of heroism? This is a magic item I almost forgot about. I like the idea of after drinking a potion of heroism, it loses the effect after a day or two. Was the effect of a hero potion supposed to be permanent? No. Now, whatever happened to the potion of heroism? I got to tell you, I went back and looked through my old books, and I looked through the first edition books, and I didn't find the potion of heroism, though I did find an explanation for the potion of superheroism, which modified how many levels you went up upon drinking it based on what you started with to begin with. I go up 3 or 2 or 1 or whatever. And I never could find the original one, and I looked through several times. Once again, proving what a crappy job was done at the layout. But I didn't have anything to do with that one. Anyway, yeah, based on what the super is in that, no, it wasn't made to last forever. It would wear off depending upon how heavily you exerted yourself. Your system burned through it or whatever. But it was never meant to be permanent. There were other ways to use heroism, a ring of heroism, a bracer of heroism, whatever. But again, it's not something that you could use all the time. It wouldn't be turned on all the time, in my campaign at least, or I'd have them burn them out. They would just be, it'd be like getting up in the morning and drinking 7 energy drinks, right, one after another, and then later that evening drinking 7 more, and eventually you're going to fry your system. Unfortunately, you probably won't get immune to what's in there. So, no, I don't believe it was ever meant to be. I believe it was meant to be, oh, hell, last ditch, and go out and save the day. That's what I believe was the original intent. How popular were the undead when D&D started? It seems to be the main focus of the game because the cleric and elf are designed to turn or be immune to them. Okay, how prevalent were they? In some regards, real prevalent. Because remember that we were encouraging the early players to draw from what they had read and use it to weave into and embellish their game settings. What was a very, very prevalent form of fantasy fiction at the time was undead this and vampire that and whatever. So zombies, horror movie stuff. So we knew, actually Gary and Dave knew that there were likely to be a lot of undead stuff because it was a very common source material. Lots of books about undead and vampires and ghosts and what have you. Horror fiction was much bigger back then than fantasy fiction. Knowing that, we expected to see lots of horror fiction type beasts, and so therefore to keep them from running over the game, clerics and elves can turn them. Clerics because of their holiness, and elves because of their their purity of nature and abhorrence of all things unnatural. There were a lot of them in the beginning because that's what people knew, and they were dragging them into their games as they were learning how to craft games. Okay, I've signed up for one of your games this coming week. I believe we just played last night, and I'm looking forward to it. I didn't see a lot I really wanted to do this year, but it'll be a good time for I'm sure. Now, as for the mask thing, I also feel the same as you. I've had my first shot, and I've done everything I can to help keep the spread down. I can't comprehend the people who think so little of each other that they use masks as political weapons and wear their tin hats when it comes to the vaccine. The GOP has created this group of people. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I was reading a magazine. They commented on a study that the Russians conducted in the late 50s and early 60s, and they found that with 2 months of exposure to basically lies and bullshit, people start believing it. It's a form of brainwashing. They're just constantly fed this stuff, and so they start believing it. Interesting, I thought, without any further comment. They call us sheep for wearing a mask, or they are more afraid of the delusion that they're giving up some rights. The right to kill innocent people is not in the Constitution. I'll do what's right for me and mine. Love your shows always. Okay, thanks. Right, I agree. They're politicizing a common sense health precaution in regard to a region's magic. Okay, as I put, this is probably a reference to when some places have it strong, some of them don't. Well, in real life, there's an entirely free documentary on YouTube, Muscle Shoals, about a town and about the musicians and coalitions of recording artists there. You might be pleasantly surprised. Well, actually, I'll probably check out the documentary, but I do know about Muscle Shoals because the Allmans went down there and recorded, and Jeff Beck recorded down there, and there's some others. And you're right, there is something about Muscle Shoals that fostered a collaboration, a zeitgeist. I'm not sure all the right terms, but yes, there is one there. Just like, my God, look at Laurel Canyon in the late '60s and all the rock musicians that all lived in Laurel Canyon and fed on each other and collaborated with each other. So yeah, there can be a magic to an area, but it's generally generated by the residents. I don't believe that there's somewhere in the hills of Kentucky where I can go and pick up a guitar and play. But no, the comment's very valid, and you're right. There is places like that, and you got to wonder. People say, "What's in the water down there?" Thanks to your contributions on psionics, I think you did a marvelous job of creating a unique system that did not imbalance the game. It's not an easy system to learn at first. You're right, and for that part I apologize. Psionic versus psionic combat is a separate mechanic altogether from the normal exchange, but outside of these rare occurrences in play, the powers and abilities work seamlessly like everything else. What I find most interesting, having delved in the subject of psionics, is there are many rules as written in first edition whose interpretation are implied versus expressed. You guys left a lot of treasure lying around, jewels in the rough, whether by accident or intention. Mind Flare not having attack mode A, for instance. So there was a lot of intention, believe me. And it kept my gnomes busy buffing out those gems. Thank you. You're welcome. Dungeon Master Tim. Monster missions. Are monsters on a mission? Are they in dungeons or specific places for specific reasons? E.g., for example, are wandering monsters on the way to the drugstore to resupply on human flesh and just happen into some free-range adventure? Then we have a subsequent question. Why are monsters interested in living in abandoned dungeons? Is it the rent? Subsequent question number 2. Do dungeons not yet abandoned get monster infestations as the torturers and jailers have to fight them off? Just how keen on dungeons are monsters? All right. some tongue-in-cheek and some legitimate in that question. Why are they living in abandoned dungeons? Well, faced with, say, we're something that lives in a cave, normally in the wild, and faced with lucking out into a den. Pardon me, that's that being up a long time already kicking in. I apologize. Why would you go live in a drafty cave if you know there's a really neat corner in a tumble down ruin, or you found a way to get underground where it's nice and warm and snug and you can chill out there for a while, hibernate there, whatever? Convenience. Given access to a garage as to a low spot under a bush, a cat is going to get into the garage to have their kittens. Or they're going to hang out in the garage so that they don't get rained and snowed on. Can't say that, what we classify as monsters, which technically is anything that isn't part of the party. It just makes sense that they would seek out dry, warm places. Used to be a little overboard, and then I started publishing articles about dungeon ecologies, and people drew back a little bit and ramped it back and said, well, yeah, wait a minute, can't have that much stuff living underground unless they eat each other. No, it's not the rent. Wandering monsters are just that. They're not layered, though you might find one wandering through the ruins away from its lair. Wandering monsters are two things. Just that. Wandering around, looking for a meal, finding a new place to live, whatever. And they're there to make parties quit bickering and get going. But of course, that's the DM's point of view. The subsequent two, do dungeons not yet abandoned get monster infestations and tortures and jails? Maybe that's how it became abandoned. It may be that a band of, really bad stuff, really bad in the sense of big and brutish and buffed, some really bad stuff took up residence in the area and decided to move in there. And it may be that it could be part of the backstory that the original habits were forced out, that there was a migration of bugbears and they forced their way in and took it over. It's only limited by your storytelling. So yeah, maybe they did fight them off and then had to leave because they just, every spring there's more bugbears. Every spring there's more bugbears. Kind of like Saxons invading southern England. Every year there's more of them. Okay. And then somebody gave me a definition of why monster. And historically, monsters seemingly were fantastical versions of the dreaded other strange people from out of the ordinary experience of a community's members. Well, I see where we're going here for, and we don't need to go all the way. In RPG contests, monsters form elements of tests or perhaps plots. We use the word monster to describe someone who does something. Pardon me again. Somebody who does something that we don't agree with, or we don't endorse. Something heinous that goes against the norm of society. Mengele, who experimented on living people, was a monster. But no, he was a man who was a sociopath. But we use that word to describe people out of the ordinary who do heinous things. They're monsters. Of course, in D&D terms, a hippogriff is a monster. Okay. This may not be a particularly original idea, but what do you think? As adventurers chalk up more and more monster kills, do they themselves become monsters to the monsters? Probably. More in a minute. Murder Hobo has a pretty badass monster name ring to it. I can imagine murder hobos appearing in a monster manual. Well, murder hobos was a big tongue-in-cheek. The actual group of murder hobos. Ooh, got to be careful on that one. Um, is a group of players that all play with Joe Manganiello out in Beverly Hills, and they are the murder hobos. They've got big patches like the Hell's Angels patches to go on the back of a jacket or whatever. But yeah, the question is valid. Are we any better? No, we are as adventurers, as a group. We wander the countryside killing stuff, killing things and taking their stuff. Now, if the DM's careful and you keep them on the straight and they claim to be good, well, then they're murdering bad stuff. Bad being the opposite of good. But yeah, absolutely any mercenary player character could definitely wear that name, murder hobo. They roam the world looking for stuff to kill and treasure to find and take away from things that they have to kill to get it. But hey, they're bad, they're evil, so it's okay. People always find a way to justify some killing. Um, and let's see. Okay, this may not. All right. Yeah, they do. Okay, I'm sorry. I skipped part of that. Or I reread part of that. You're right. Um, Murder Hobo has a pretty badass name, but yeah, you're professional mercenaries killing things, or freelance mercenaries killing things. You don't get many treasures negotiating. Another question from the same questioner. What, if any, monstrous version of Delver's adventures have you used or come across in your game's history? Well, I can't think of one that's particularly better than the other. If it wasn't if everything wasn't stone, um, a boule would be wonderful for tunneling, digging between rooms and whatever. Okay, now we come back to a very, very, very long about the having his players write up something, and he goes on to explain that he's attempting to get his players to invest in, at least intellectually, a little bit, invest in the characters they're playing, and that's a great idea. And he goes on to say that it may help the player better envision their player characters and help them slip on the mantle of the role easier. Also, a very valid argument. He goes on to talk about that RPGs is sort of a deliberate dissociative reality, but that RPGs can also be therapy for people with PTSD. And so, yeah, I mean, you'll never hear me say anything bad about role playing as a mechanic or a field or whatever. Um, it's got a lot of benefits and bennies, and it's not like TSR invented role playing. Psychologists and sociologists were using role play in therapy for years, and they actually called it role playing, but they was so isolated in the medical field that it took us a while to realize that that's what it was, and therefore call it that. And he said that the point of the creative writing was to get them to invest in their the personal lives of the characters, and that's great. And later on, he makes a rather indelicate response to my question: Are you as a DM skilled enough to read bad stuff? and a rude comment, a rude affirmative follows. Because I have no clue how long he has been trolling flame wars and rants with people online and growing a very thick skin. Well, I hope you're not one that just goes and starts firestorms for no reason. Okay, back to a game-related topic besides hit points. You mentioned once that first edition AD&D was written as a rules standard for tournament play. Yes. We were making money hand over fist. We didn't see it coming, but we'd offer tournaments at like Metro Detroit Gamers Con and have 60 groups of 8 or 9 people sign up because we were encouraging people to sign up as a group, figuring that they'd play better together, etc. And we had to, in those early days, we had to provide a stable of GMs, DMs, whatever you call them nowadays. And we had to kind of have a briefing on what we thought was important. And the point of it was that in the beginning, you entered the first round, and then we decided, the judges, by evaluating the play, decided who played well enough to go on to the second. And again, did that for the finals, the finals. And it wasn't head to head or anything like that, because we were grading. How well did they do this? How well did they do that? And it was very subjective. No matter that there were 5 of us from TSR and 4 people from Detroit who we knew very well and trusted, etc., and we gave them the old briefing and all that, we were still all very subjective because interpretations of the rules were so wide and varied from region to region and group to group. So, besides the fact that Gary was trying to cut Dave out of money by creating something new and different and therefore not having to pay Dave a royalty, it was also for the purpose of standardizing stuff so that we could continue making money hand over fist, because now we had a set of rules that said this is how it's done. Standardization, and we imposed order, and we set up a bona fide standard of grading, if you will, or judging, as it was actually. But it was grading because, okay, how well did you do? Did you do well enough to get on to the next level? Now it's how many, how well, who lived, who died, et cetera, et cetera. It was much easier to assess their performance when we knew that every group had the same 2 hits, the same to be hit, etc. Now it was a level playing field. Just like when I nowadays give out pre-gens, everybody starts at roughly the same place, so it's valid. I apologize again. It's valid to compare how Group A did versus Group B because you have a metric with which to judge them both the same. Let's see, weapons versus armor type is one of those found in first edition. Weapon versus armor type served 2 things. We felt it made it a little more realistic, and we felt that by doing that, we were feeding the demand for more realism. Yeah, it's fox chasing its tail, which came first. But that's really where it, how it got there. Yeah, don't have much more to say about that. Did I say that my cardinal rule is play a game for fun or don't play at all? Right. If you're not having fun playing a game, it's better not to play the game. Right. Who does anything that isn't fun or is unpleasant. If you happen to stub your toe swinging your foot under the table, you don't do it on purpose 3 more times. Crude analogy, but you shouldn't continue doing things that aren't fun or even unfun. Not fun, all one word. If you're gonna, okay, you're right. I did say that. It's fun for me, this is a writer, to perceive better encouragement to perceive challenging situations, such as building talents and skills, as a D&D character and then translating that to in real life. Okay, how's your lock picking coming along? Did you get into your car the last time it was you locked yourself out? Just being slightly facetious here. I don't mean to ridicule. There's not a lot of shit we learn to do in D&D that translates into real life, except perhaps a little bit of diplomacy. Come on. Swinging swords, making potions, casting spells. I don't know where you live, but I don't see much that translates into my reality. But hey, okay, perhaps the kind of epic encouragement for creative individual empowerment group storytelling I dream of is expressing in an ongoing RPG group what might be dramatized in the movie Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams, or a famous speech by author Ken Kesey. Okay. Whatever keeps your players fired up is legitimate, whether it's their own fun or you've thrown them some fun along the way. Okay, back to game-related topics besides hit points. Oh, that's where I was. I'm sorry. I'm rambling tonight. And you're right. We're talking about weapons and armor class and armor types. Yes, it was. We were trying to feed both sides. Better magic, but more. More real. With something that's innately unreal. Okay, was it designed to balance usage of different weapons and classes that had weapon restrictions versus the advantages of fighters that enjoy near automatic hit probabilities due to higher level magic and strength? Well, yeah, it shouldn't be a standard roll to hit the other guy. If he's wearing exceptionally fine armor, it ought to be harder to hit him. Now, when I use the word hit, yes, I can inflict hit points, just as hit points can be inflicted on me. But if I can't inflict hit points at all, I'll never succeed in slaying or dissuading, at the very least, that monster. Yeah, if you get up to a certain level, if all you're doing is fighting crap, it gets pretty automatic. But if you get up to a certain level and all of a sudden you're fighting monsters of a certain level, the playing field levels out again and sometimes tips into monsters' favor. And his experience is that without such a system, there's no reason to use anything but a long sword as a single-handed weapon, a two-handed sword, or the longbow for range. Long live the bec de carbine, Lucium hammers, heavy crossbows, and military picks. Yeah, again, if you want to, if this is a game, it's not real life. However, if you want the verisimilitude of real life, then yeah, a pick ought to be quite effective against plate, but it's not going to be as effective against other things by its nature, or not as lethal by its nature. But it's certainly a specialty weapon for piercing cuirass and helmets. let's face it, it'd be boring as hell as every new player got issued a sword and a shield and a dagger. Here you go, boys, go to war. Make your fortune. And us DMs would get bored as hell just letting you find swords and daggers when we couldn't have exotic pole weapons and fancy bows and, come on, give us a break on the other side. Okay, here we go talking about poisons. Maybe this comes from my treatment of hit points as well as being a bit of a softy with my players sometimes. But in my games, poison from venomous attacks, snake bite, purple worm, sting, poison blade, etc., require a save whenever the damage from such attacks equals or exceeds the victim's hit dice. I think you meant hit points here. I also use all d6s for hit dice with a variable progression, so fighters will have more hit dice, not bigger, so they're better at resisting these effects. Interesting side effect. I certainly see no wrong in that. If you take multiple hits, the counter resets once the damage gets high enough and you need to make a save, and so multiple saves might be called for if someone gets dogpiled by asps or something. Interesting idea. If it works for you and your players are buy into it, no criticism from me. And I think it's an interesting idea. I enjoy your videos and your takes on old and new stuff. The Kickstarter trolling, I agree. I don't empower the trolls for $1. At least get $5. I agree. The mask, science, politicizing, SSD. You platformed the guy's comment and went into politics. Your channel and I, but I enjoy your takes on gaming. Yes, I did. And I went a little farther than I really needed to, but not nearly as far as I wanted to, because I could have gone on for another 18 minutes talking about all the things that I didn't say publicly. As a former history and government teacher, I could have waxed most eloquently, but I didn't. And I'm not going to go back into it anymore now. Someday I hope to, okay, yeah, we'll be at a con one day. People tell you that people walked up to me at cons, as long as they don't interrupt an ongoing conversation I have, I try to be as gracious as possible. If you butt into my conversation, I'll probably get upset. If you stand where I can see you and I can obviously see you want to speak with me, that's a different story. I'll try to wrap up what I'm doing. Or if I'm talking to a very, very good friend, I'll say, let's hold a minute. I think this guy needs something. And I'll talk to you. Now, I can't go off on a 10-minute conversation. But if you're just saying, oh, gee, thanks, or sign my book or whatever, yeah, I try to be very accessible at these cons. I don't want anybody to think I'm a stuck-up snob. What are your thoughts on D&D as a collaborative storytelling game? In quotes. Do your experiences with D&D jive with the idea that focusing on plot and character backstories is a worthwhile endeavor? Apologies if you've answered this 100 times. Advocating for mask wearing isn't political, I agree. Could have done without the orange man bits, but it's your channel and you the boss. You're right. Everybody could have, but I just felt good after swallowing that for all that time. I felt good to vomit a little out. But it's gone now in the bad taste. Collaborative storytelling. Absolutely. I have always felt that when you're running a campaign. And even a small aspect of my Wheel of Blame, that it's about the story and everybody contributes. As the DM, you do an outline, a very rough, open-ended outline. Ruins, rumor of treasure, guards, whether they're monster or human. The players then, as they react to your broader explanations, demand more detailed explanations, and now the story starts forming. You've basically laid out the general outlines of the plot. Find X at ruin Y, retrieve, take to wizard Z, and get a huge ton of treasure dumped on me. how that all happens, how that transpires, the side trips along the way, the frustrations, the triumphs, that all gets filled in by the actual play of the game. And of course, the players have the biggest part of that aspect of the play is they make the game. Monster economies. Without putting words in your mouth, I've seen enough curmudgeon to think that this level of detail ain't what you spend time on, but why do monsters have treasure and where do they get it from? Coincidence of geographical location can't account for all cases, i.e., treasure got there first, monster cohabits by chance, seems unlikely for more sentient monsters too. And then, as a follow up to that, what do monsters use treasure for? Okay, depends on the monster, doesn't it? Because as we all know, dragons love treasure. And what do they use it for? They sleep on it. Okay, now that's the one extreme at the top of the mountain. I don't believe that most monsters accumulate treasure for its intrinsic value. They don't foresee the day when they can take all their silver plate down to the village and buy a herd of cattle with it. They might keep it because they know it'll draw humans, whom they hate or like eating, or for whatever sick and twisted reason they might have. Yeah, some of it is going to be coincidental. If there's a ruins that's been ruined, empty for a couple of 100 years, and maybe they were all wiped out by a plague or whatever, chances are it hasn't been picked over yet, and something big enough and bad enough decides to live there. Chances are it won't get picked over by humans until they defeat the biggest, the big bad thing that's living there now. I used to have, well, in fact, I've written monster descriptions where certain monsters like to eat gems or gold because the chemical properties are good for their metabolisms. And that's certainly a reason to have it. Just gold, silver and copper. Who wants to eat that? But there's any number of reasons. However, if you're trekking through the wilderness and you get bounced by a couple of bugbears and you track them back to their lair and you wipe them all out, are you going to find a huge treasure chest with 600 pearls in it? No. You might find a really choice ring or a scattering of coins or a piece of jewelry or whatever that are left over after the bugbears ate the last guy they caught. They're dead. There's no ill karma attached to it if they're dead and you find it. All cases, all right. The more sentient monsters are more likely to use it as a bait. If the sentient monster has the ability to speak to minions, they may realize that if they let their minions spread it around, they'll achieve their desired effect, whether it's accumulating supplies or, again, luring victims in or whatever. That's limited only by your imagination, really, truly. And I don't mean to be dismissive, but no, does a group of centaurs would be a bad example because they're highly sentient. But why would a band of carnivorous apes keep strings of pearls? Because they're pretty. Keep a ruby necklace because it's pretty and it shines and it sparkles. Maybe the same reason that they keep a broken mirror. It's not at all magical, but it shines. And they think it's funny and they look at themselves in the cracked mirror that's, you know, stark gray crack, and they see 5 little apes. And if the fact that the mirror's back and handle are made out of mithril would have no bearing on their wanting to keep it at all. You know, just like a parakeet likes to see itself in the mirror in its cage. That's another possibility. What do they use it for? Well, some of them need to eat it. Okay, now, I apparently misspoke, and I'm going to expound on a thing. And this is a very dear friend of mine, which kind of surprises me and kind of wounds with this comment. Thieves, the worst thing that happened to D? No. If you think that, you don't know the game or its history very well. Well, I beg to differ with that argument with anybody. Now, what I probably wasn't clear enough with, thieves were an immediate problem. Long before the demon worship and the black magic and all that, as soon as thieves came out, they were hit upon because thieves obviously encouraged breaking the law. And now we're teaching lawless behavior. It's okay to go out and steal things. That drew the first uproar, and it was like somebody threw a naphtha bomb into the room and torched it. It was just like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? And really all we were talking about is a rogue, small r. We were just talking about the Asian guy that runs around with Conan in the first movie, and he's got clever fingers and adept, and he's good at scaling walls and whatever. And so, yeah, he's a second story man or whatever. And no, that's not legal, but we're not playing legal science fiction, legal fantasy. We're playing heroic fantasy, where some of those things are just kind of not looked at. Kugel the Clever, Fafford, and the Mauser. There's always examples of people that take things for a living. Now, you and I in the real world know that stealing from a bad guy, stealing from a mobster, besides the danger of being rubbed out for having done it, stealing is stealing is stealing. People try to justify, well, I was stealing it from another thief. Okay, and it's still stealing. Thieves immediately drew flack. We're teaching their children to be scofflaws. We're teaching their children it's okay to burglar their neighbors' houses in the middle of the night, and it's okay to stab in the back and get greater effect from it. It was only after they ran out of wind hollering about thieves that then they hit on the black magic and the conjuring and the Satanism and all that. I do believe that if we hadn't called them thieves, if we called them rogues and done a better description, we might never have experienced the Satanism and devil worship stuff. Because thieves were the trigger. Worst thing, arguably, I would still say yes, because they created the first flack. And from it grew the others. The demon worship and sacrifice and all that other ludicrous crap. So I'll stand by my assertion that, yeah, thieves were a horrible thing that happened to D&D because they led to the rest of the brouhaha. That's my logic. Now, that's the end of my questions. I got another game to run on Saturday night and a game to run on late Sunday morning. 2 down, 2 to go. We've had some really good times so far in these games. Some really interesting stuff. If you've played before and haven't played recently, you could essentially call it Wheel of Blame 2.0. Maybe you're underground, maybe you're above ground, maybe you're underwater, maybe you're in the sky. Don't know. I'm no longer limited. And we're having a whole lot more fun. So, it's the minute of Gary Con. If you haven't signed up for a virtual game, you ought to try it. I'm probably going to be I'm going to be running virtual games for Texas. I don't feel good yet about flying down in a metal tube with a bunch of idiots that won't wear a mask. I know I've had my vaccines. I'm past that date. I might be carrying it literally on my person or in my mouth, and thereby run the risk of infecting someone else. I've lost family members. There was a comment placed on the end that I ignored simply because they used the word scamdemic. That's how many extended family members dead from the scandemic in my family. Think about that. And for God's sakes, follow the science. And with that, I'll say Dodada Gopi. Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. PSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.